Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we wrap up our look at films from 1995. We'll be looking at Alex de la Iglesia's film, The Day of the Beast. But first, we are going to look at Desperado, the second feature from Robert Rodriguez, starring Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek. So, Ariana, what did you think of Desperado?
So I saw Desperado, I remember, as a kid first.
You mean El Mariachi?
No, I mean...
You saw this? Okay.
Yeah, I also saw a mariachi,
which I have not seen El Mariachi, but then I saw Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which you have not seen.
Yeah, and El Mariachi, for some reason, was embedded in my brain. I think it was just one of the first, like Spanish action films where I was just like, what? Like Desperado, I remember I tried to, there was a music video that you could solicit on this channel called The Box. I don't know if you remember The Box.
I didn't have cable.
Okay, so it was a channel where you could pay for them to play a music video, and you'd have to put in the numbers. Of course, I never ordered this because my grandmother would have been on my fucking ass on it.
Because I'm sure it was $1.99 or something. Yeah. So you'd be which is crazy because now you think of when you want to bring up a song or watch a music video, you just go to YouTube.
Yeah. And so I remember the Antonio Banderas one. And this movie as a kid, I thought of it more of a serious film. But now watching an adult is this is an action comedy.
Well, somebody pointed out, they said one of Rodriguez's attempts to make a somewhat serious movie before he just started making live action cartoons.
Yeah.
Which, when you think about Spy Kids and Shark Boy and Lava Girl and all of the stuff he kind of does, and even the Grindhouse feature he did, Planet Terror, they're cartoons. Well, these are cartoons.
It's also he's trying to make those grimy B version movies that you'd end up renting or watching on cable late at night. But I think Desperado was not serious at all. And Mariachi was serious to me from what I remember. But this one had
it was silly from the first scene.
Yes, because I think one of my favorite scenes where they're discussing about this hit person that is brought into the to the movie, and every mention the guy is on the phone. Can you describe him for me?
Well, let's look at, because it's Danny Trejo.
Yes.
As Navajas.
Yes.
And he has been sent by the big boss, who we never see or really know anything about. And I think maybe in Once Upon a Time in Mexico they touch on that. I can't remember. It's been 20 years since I saw that movie. And so the villain of the film, Buco, his men kill Navajas because they don't know who he is. Do they think he is the guy they're after, or they just think he's some other?
Remember, the orders are just kill whoever you don't know.
And so they bring him in while Buco is on the phone, and he goes, "Oh, you sent a man here?" And he's looking at the body of Navas, and he's like, "What does he look like?"
It is brown hair, brown eyes. That's a lot of people.
Yeah. And they open his vest, and they go, "Oh, he has a tattoo of what?
Of
a woman." And that's exactly what she's saying. Oh, he uses a very special kind of weapon. And he goes, throwing knives, and they lift up the throwing knives. So yeah, it feels it's
and then he's got pesos for money, and that
they pull out a bag of pesos,
a bunch of coins falling, which solidified to me. I'm okay, this is
it's very much the rhythm of the movie is slapstick comedy.
Yes, but I think what makes it enjoyable is that everyone is taking their role seriously.
Well, that's where there was a scene in the end. I don't want to say it because I guess it is the biggest spoiler of the movie about Buco.
Yeah.
And I looked at you and I was like, he's very inspired by telenovelas, right? And
yeah,
totally.
yeah. It's fun. It's ridiculous fun. It's gory fun. But it is
a little boring. Because I felt I was drifting a bit, and maybe it's because action movies in this vein are just not my thing.
Yeah.
Where I was kind of because it's sort of oh, you want to do an action movie? And my thing is, if you're going to do an action movie, go fucking insane.
Yeah.
But then the rhythm of okay, we're going to have an action set piece, and then we're going to cool things down. We're going to have a talkie scene between, El Mariachi and Carolina. And those were the parts where I would get bored because I'm like, let's go back to the crazy action shit. Nobody cares about any of this relationship.
It's really amusing to me when I think about this whole film. This all happens in a day.
Yeah.
This all happens.
It's a very
in
busy
one day because Carolina's having a conversation with Bucho at one point, and he's like, "Have you seen anyone?" And she's like, "Oh, like what, that huge thing that happened this morning." And you're kind of like, okay.
Like
and
those people were hanging out in a bar like 6 or 7 in the morning.
You're like 8 o'clock in the morning. I think it's just also a lot of times it just felt like he was testing the waters to see what he could get away with. I also wonder like what the interpretation, like what he would have done now, because I think one of my
a lot more green screen, I guess.
Probably, but it was almost like I think one of my favorite bits is supposed to be they just have like American tourists wandering around.
That is pretty funny.
And they just like are complaining about the service at some point when those people are just sort of like, we're dealing with bigger things.
Well, it's like you're in the middle of this like gritty Leone inspired kind of action movie set in Mexico. And like you have Cheech Marin as this bartender talking to like Tavo, one of his men. And then just these American women go, excuse me, where is our waiter? And they're just and they're like oblivious to the fact, like when you look at these dudes look scary, but these Americans are just they're very much like Karens, and then you have like college students that show up right after like the bar has been massacred and like walk in to get drinks and there's bodies everywhere.
Yeah, just like, can't you tell it's closed because they're just standing there.
What did you think of Antonio Banderas as El Mariachi?
I thought he was very good. I think it's also this interesting thing of having seen him now in multiple roles and seeing him having done English and Spanish, you start to appreciate that, like, oh, he's a very good actor.
Well, like I realized when I think of Antonio Banderas, I think of his Pedro Almodovar work, because that's most of the movies I've seen him in, I believe, are those movies. But for a lot of, American audiences, he's like Desperado and Zorro, and he's like an action movie kind of guy.
Like rom-coms in the 90s from what I can remember, because I know like he's like Dakota Johnson's like stepdad. Like it was just like at the end, like it was a silly film. You could tell like when you look back at like Rodriguez like cinema stuff, he loves working with Cheech Marin, obviously.
Marin, I believe.
Marin. Quentin Tarantino,
Danny Trejo shows up all the time.
Steve Buscemi, who's like has a brief thing.
And whose character's name is Buscemi. So like they just did, but like I liked his tiny part in the movie. Did he get killed? Because he just kind of disappeared.
No, he just disappeared.
Yeah, I was like,
just like, I'm done.
Okay.
And he was like, what? And he's like, no, I'm done. You fucked it up.
Because I was a little disappointed because like, halfway through the movie, I'm like, when is he going to show up again? And he's just gone.
Well, like, no, he has an honest. They're like in the church, and he tells.
Well, I know, but like, I assumed he would show back up.
But you thought like once, maybe like
because it's like, well, he hasn't. It's like you said, it's all happening in the same day, so he may have not left town yet, right? What did you think of Salma Hayek? Because a lot of people, this wasn't her first acting gig, but people say this was her like breakout role, where an audience outside of the Spanish-speaking world became aware of her.
I mean, she's very charismatic. That is one thing that
but not a great actor.
No, because I remember like there's a film that she's in that she's like with the guy that plays Chandler in Friends, and it's supposed to be like a surprise baby that they end up having. Like
that just sounds like one of those disposable 90s movies.
And so like she was very charismatic in that film, but she's still just playing like it's just Salma Hayek.
Well, when I think about it, it's maybe other than Frida, and I would need to go back and watch Frida because it's been over a decade since I watched it. So I don't know if she was a good actor in that movie or not, or if it was just the makeup was doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
But like, I really have never thought Salma Hayek is that great of an actress. She seems, especially in Desperado, she is there because she is a sex object.
Oh, she's just
that's it.
Very pretty. Like Dusk Till Dawn, was that his?
That was Rodriguez. That was, I think, his follow-up
and it
to
was like,
Desperado.
She also a sex object, barely talks.
And she plays a villain, and I mean, she's believable as that villain. But once again, it's another instance of, well, there's a lot of special effects and makeup that's helping the villain thing happen.
It's again, it's not like it's.
She seems to understand the tone of the movie, that this is a silly movie.
Yes.
And that's good, because then that means her performance is never in conflict with Banderas or the rest of the film.
Yeah, it's just she's not. It's again one of those films that she doesn't need to be that high of an actor to actually get the point across. But it's one that you're like, oh, I've never seen her do anything that's like very challenging. That you're just like, oh, maybe like breakdown crying kind of shit, or just anger, or like
she married, I think he's like the CEO of the company that owns the brands Balenciaga,
she's
V Saint Laurent.
So
yeah, he's a billionaire.
Like,
so yeah,
sort of like it's
a hobby.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby for her.
It's a nice hobby that gives her a nice chunk of change.
It's somebody wanted Salma Hayek's name in the credit of their movies, and she was nice enough to go, okay, we'll do that. But yeah, she's someone that I've always seen her. She's one of those people that falls in the category of like a famous personality more than a famous actor, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That when she shows up in like, the Grown Ups movies with Adam Sandler, once again, she's not really acting. Not that anyone acts in those movies.
Yeah.
But it's just sort of like, oh, she's a friend. She got a little bit of money. She probably donated it to a charity or something she supports, and then moved on with her life.
I think it's this interesting thing, the contrast with Antonio Banderas, that like he has been a few stuff that like when you think to yourself like you could get confused if you're strictly only watching his English speaking movies, that he faded off to the from the face of the earth and has only done Puss in Boots. Only to then, like, if you're a real movie fan, you'd realize, oh no, he just continued on working in Spanish in better films.
Because like The Skin I Live In,
yeah,
it's such
like,
an incredible role where he plays this like mad scientist villain, but super serious. And you see, like, you compare like Desperado, where he is playing this like cartoonish superhero.
Yeah.
And then you see something like The Skin I Live In, where he's playing someone that could be cartoonish, but playing it very straight.
Yeah, I mean, like in Desperado, he's just basically doing a lot of smoldering, and then like being like, I've suffered so much, you don't understand.
It's a lot of like reaction shots and things like that. I would say it's a film that's very much about set piece events, because you have like the big shootout at the bar. That's kind of your opening one. Then you have the bookstore sequence.
Mm-hmm.
There's the one where the original mariachi and another mariachi who has like a rocket launcher in his guitar case show up. And it's like the whole film seems predicated around the action set pieces, and then the parts in between those action set pieces are where the movie either lost me or got me back. And where it got me back was whenever it focused on El Buco and his men. That was the best part of the movie, because that's where you really realize this is a comedy.
Yeah.
Because Buco is a horrible boss. His men are idiots. And so Rodriguez minds a lot of comedy. It's a very like dark, violent comedy out of it.
Yeah, it's more like these men are like, they're loyal to this man who they're assuming is paranoid, but is actually not really that paranoid to begin with. He happens to be in the right.
He's not that like nefarious and evil of a villain.
They're trying to paint as if El Mariachi is not a real thing. It's supposed to be like almost like a Google or like the boogeyman, like, oh, this is something that like higher up sphere. And then which is like, no, he's out there. You just haven't fucking found him. But it's a surface level movie at the end of the day. Because,
there's no subtext here.
Like, there's supposed to be this indicator that everyone in town is being paid by Buco, because like they drop off stuff and people come pick it up.
Like Carolina's bookstore was built by
and she gets like $50,000 a year, and like like everybody is working for him. So if everybody was working for him, wouldn't there be also like higher consequences on the actions of a mariachi, like just being around, getting a hotel, or just being like having more people ID him, or just being like, what the fuck are you doing here? And it's also the question of like, then why tourists would come to a town
That's like this.
that
Because
like
not that nice of a
that
town.
like that Carolina is basically saying like you can't make money here. Then why are there tourists showing up?
Well, that was the world building was very scattered.
Yeah.
And this feels like a movie, and a lot of Rodriguez's movies, they're about world building, right? Like Spy Kids is just all about this insane cartoon world.
Yeah.
And then here, I feel like it could have benefited from a little more consistent, stronger world building, because I felt like that town was not very inhabited.
No, I think it's hard to do because again, it's like I don't expect everything to be like a Breaking Bad / Better Call Saul thing. Because I was thinking about it earlier today when I was out riding my bike. I'm like, yeah, the funny thing about Better Call Saul is there are a lot of characters that you meet briefly that you want to know more about.
But they won't let you.
Like, for example, I think about like how Gus has like there's these neighbors that like he is allowed to be in their house. And like I want to be like what's I want to know about them, about these people that are just like just so fucking okay. And but then you're like,
well, if Disney Plus ever buys it, then we'll get 1,000 TV shows about every character.
It's just like, but you know very well that the writers are like, yes, we gave you something very interesting, but let's come back to the main focus.
Because that's one of those. It's that push and pull when you have a universe populated by people or by characters with very strong, bold personalities.
Yeah.
Is especially in a film, you're just getting a taste of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like Buscemi's character, I want to what's going on with that guy? Like, where did he go? Why was he here? Like, what is
like? Is he the guy that scopes? Which reminds me of like was it Fallen Angels that we watched? That like
Wong Kar-wai.
Like that the woman comes in like
everything
and then lets him know.
So he's like the advanced man who comes and tells El Mariachi everything that's going on.
But then is also like giving him feedback once the job is done of being like it's too blah blah blah.
Well, and then the connection between Bucco and El Mariachi, I felt like, oh, there's something that could have been explored. Like, what's going on here? Why'd this go sour? Like,
I think it's supposed to leave it up to your imagination, but it's not good enough when you don't leave like really good seeds to let it grow.
Yeah, because it's not like the script is written so well that it evokes an idea of what might be. It just kind of is very like I was thinking it's a movie made by a guy influenced by a lot of stuff he loved watching when he was younger, like a teenager.
Yeah.
And that's fueling this. It's the same thing with like Tarantino, right? Everything Tarantino makes started as a seed from back when he worked in a video store.
Yeah.
But then you need a kind of writing, like, and that's where I feel like I've always kind of leaned more towards Tarantino than Rodriguez when it comes to the writing aspect of their movies.
Yeah.
Because Tarantino writes evocatively. You think about something like Kill Bill, where you have all these characters that we don't spend a lot of time with, but like you can feel and infer the backstory and the history there.
Yeah.
With Desperado, I'm like, I can't really. It's I'm getting such broad strokes that I don't really know. Like, it could be a whole number of things that happened in the past between these characters.
Sort of like he just seems like the type of person that like once he gets into it, once he has his hands on it, he likes the whole like procedure of making the film.
Yes.
And doesn't go deeper into it versus
he likes choreographing action sequences.
Yes.
That's his strength.
And that is a good strength. And this is not to say this is not knocking this movie. This is not knocking people that like that type of stuff. But for people who want more meat on the bones, like a Tarantino makes sense. I'm trying to think of the guy that did like Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, I was Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright does like that type of stuff. Who has like a similar.
You think about like Hot Fuzz. Feels like a Rodriguez movie.
Yeah, and it's just like, and it's also the fact that like at the least with Rodriguez, he's just sort of like he is such a proud Mexican American that it's sort of like as as a Latino person, like I find it very interesting to see it with people that are like similar to myself on the screen.
He is one of those people that has been odd to me though, because I can remember Planet Terror, and it features twins.
Yeah.
And I
the
found out
thing
those
with
are
it-
his nieces.
I think nieces from his ex-wife's side.
Yes, they weren't his. I mean, which that would make it creepier if they were from his side of the family. It's still creepy, and they're very sexualized. And then I think they come back in like a Machete film or something, and are because they're older, they sexualize them even more.
Yeah.
And that is the one thing is Robert Rodriguez does not write female characters from what I maybe like the little girl Alexa Vega in Spy Kids, maybe I guess like those. But in his action movies, his like more adult movies, his female characters are very
I mean, even like
not
Carolina
terrible.
is just like she's again because Salma Hayek is so charming. Carolina comes out charming, but there is
She's not really acting; she's just being herself.
yeah, she's just being like, "Oopsie, I caused a car crash because I'm so hot." But I love books, and I've always loved books. But we don't hear her talk.
Okay, name a book you like.
Yeah, we don't like, and how everybody around her is sort of like, bad mistake, everybody, nobody reads anymore, and it's
And
just,
I don't, and it doesn't really seem like she reads either because she never mentions any
yeah,
titles
it's
or
sort
anything.
of like it would have been interesting had she been a person that like maybe she liked reading detective stuff like that had to do with gunslingers, or like maybe like even as a joke to just be like, hey, there's somebody who's been writing about you, like and mariachi.
Oh, El
Like,
Mariachi, and like pulls out this whole series of books. But like it's like they just were like, what would be an unexpected character trait? Oh, she owns a bookstore. And then they didn't go any further in developing that idea.
yeah, it's only supposed to be like, okay, good, she has a bookstore because when she's like mending and mariachi's like wounds, she happens to have a book that's showing her how to stitch. And I'm like, that was a cool concept.
Or
but then,
like I could also have that scene in there with, you know, her dad is a doctor who died, and so she has his medical library or something there.
Like it just being like, hey, maybe she has a book that teaches her how to make bombs to help him. Like there's
just, yeah. But it feels very much like a movie of the 90s.
Yeah.
It had a budget of $7 million. And I think for that level of a budget, the cinematography is really good.
Yeah.
He shoots like Rodriguez is a very strong technical filmmaker. He's just not a great storyteller or writer of characters. He's good at these sort of broad characters, but you can do broad characters and still give them nuance and complexity and make them even more interesting. Because that's where like Tarantino takes movies concepts that you would say are a B tier movie, but then like adds these layers to them that you don't expect from movies like that.
Well, I think it's also from my understanding of just viewing these films, it feels as if like Tarantino has a certain trust within his actors to add and elevate certain things of it just being like maybe they want to add this to the background, or maybe this reaction will go and see what happens. But like with Rodriguez, it's sort of like just read what's on the paper.
Well, I feel like From Dusk Till Dawn does a better job of that world building than Desperado does, because there's a lot of characters we only get hints of from Dusk Till Dawn, like Harvey Keitel and his family. But like I feel like I have a good understanding of those.
That people. Makes sense because that film later he developed it into a show. So like he really loved that universe.
But I mean, he really loved the Desperado universe. He did a whole trilogy. But but the trilogy is very much in the vein of like Leone's Dollars trilogy, in that there's this recurring character, but narrative wise, they all seem to be very isolated from each other.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, he doesn't elevate it to that point, because with those characters, even though if there's not a lot of dialogue, at the least there's emotional weight that's carried upon it. And the world does feel real because it's sort of like, in those films, the ones that you like primarily mentioned, the women are treated horribly. Like the women aren't like allowed to be main protagonists. But the reason that we see that is because the men are fucking terrible. Like they do not let them like survive in this world like without like a beating or a threat. And this one, like Carolina's kind of like, oh, Buko, it scares me, because Buko's like, you know, giving her fuck me eyes. And then she's like, if I leave, he will follow me wherever. And you're like, okay, can you explain? Can you
How would he be able to
explain?
follow you?
Because he seems to have like a bodyguard / girlfriend going on.
He also
here.
seems very locally based. He doesn't seem like an international crime lord.
You're like, how powerful is this pussy that he's like, I will seek it out to the depths of this world.
But I would say I can understand what attracted people to this movie, because I think it ended up making like 58 million on a 7 million budget.
That's great.
Which in 95 for like a low budget movie, that's great. It was one of those movies that helped build the Miramax brand before the Weinsteins destroyed that brand. And so yeah, it's one of those where I could say if you really, really want to see this movie because you're a big Rodriguez completionist, you probably have already watched it, honestly, at this point.
Or if you want to throw out a movie without having to think too much.
It's a movie that can play in the background and it'll be fine. So the last film from our series on missed movies from the 1995 year is another film directed by a Spanish-speaking director, and this is The Day of the Beast, written and directed by Alex de la Iglesia, which you have not seen any of his movies. I've seen 2 of them. I've seen Perdita Durango and The Last Circus. And so I kind of knew tonally what we were in for when we watched this. It's a very slapsticky, dark comedy horror sort of thing.
Yeah.
The premise of the film concerns a priest named Angel who believes he has decoded from the Bible the birth date of the Antichrist, which happens to be Christmas 1995. He teams up with a heavy metal fan and a television psychic to find the infant Antichrist and be present at its birth. So it's a Christmas movie, technically. It's set on Christmas, or Christmas Eve. Ariana, what did you think of The Day of the Beast?
I thought it was a pretty silly film. It's it's one that I just can't be like, oh my God, what an amazing film that you have to watch.
It's very rough around the edges.
Yes,
extremely rough around the edges.
It is rough around the edges where you're not really like, you get the gist of what's going on until he starts to explain it even further as to why he needs to do this. And in the meantime, he's saying that he's going to commit as many evil atrocities as he can in order to get on Satan's side.
Yeah, because he's sort of like, I need to switch sides. The Antichrist is about to take over.
It's also, but then he explains that he wants to be where the child is born so he can kill the child.
Yes.
To stop what's going on. But it's like this interesting thing that when he starts to explain it, people start asking him, well, how will like the evil powers be not know that you're going to do this? And he's like, well, I'm just going to commit as many evil atrocities.
He's going to trick them into thinking he's evil.
And so at the beginning, it is kind of funny because like he is dressed up fully as a priest.
He's got the collar and everything.
He's got the collar. Like I think he steals from a homeless person.
Oh, he does all kinds of like mean things.
Someone off a thing that like they fall off a ledger and they're like people who witness it.
I feel like
knowing what to do.
He does something to like a little kid or something, like steals something from a kid.
He steals from a homeless person. I think he pushes a kid off of like a fence and they fall into like a subway station kind of thing. I kind of almost wish that he had continued on these like little adventures of going to go fuck people other shit off, because it's just like he kind of stops.
Well, because then the plot kind of kicks in.
Yeah, the plot kicks in. He meets this heavy metal a dude that works
Jose Maria
that like works like at a music store, and who tells him like, hey, my mom owns like a
boarding house apartment
like
kind of situation.
Apartment. You can go over and like
there's a room for rent.
There's a room. Just tell them that I sent you.
What I love about Jose is the priest explains what he's doing, and there's not a second where Jose is like, "You're crazy." He's like, "Oh yeah, okay, Antichrist is gonna be born. I'm on board."
Like, oh, awesome.
Yeah, he's been waiting for this.
And like the funny thing, what amused me is like the dude kept saying something that I tend to say a lot when my mom tells me something that's very like extreme. Will be like, he's "oh, que fuerte," which means like the translation of "oh, that's heavy." And but it's this weird, it wants to be a buddy film without really committing to the buddy film.
Well, it becomes like a trio comedy because
Yes.
they introduce Professor Kavan, who's the television psychic.
Yes.
And it just becomes basically like these three dudes getting in increasingly more dangerous situations until the
Yes.
movie kind of has its climax.
And because it's kind of messy, you're not really sure, like, the ending doesn't feel very satisfying.
Well, like the movie, and I'm sure this was intentional, that it never allows you to know, is there really supernatural shit going on, or are these dudes crazy? Because there's things that happen, but you're like, are they hallucinating for some reason?
They're supposed to take mushrooms.
Yeah.
That actually take acid.
Well, then they see, like, because there's like a black goat that stands up on its hind legs and talks to them, but it's like they're the only ones who witnessed that, so you don't know if it's real or not.
Yeah, and it's like there's also the fact that there are terrorists running around the city.
The Limpia Madrid,
which is like clean Madrid. So what
they're like fascists.
Yeah,
basically.
they're going after like immigrants, obviously,
and homeless people.
So there's like that connection, but then you start to realize that maybe that it's just a coincidence that they happen to meet in the middle of the night. There is a moment of doubt that comes from the priest because he's just like, I think I fucked up. And it was already like, and it's one that I kind of wish that there was an argument of just being like, we already started this, let's just
we're too deep. We gotta go all the way.
And it's like again, it is messy, and I'm not one to be like, oh my god, I wish it was gorier, but I almost wish it went a little.
It does lean a little too much on the comedy side, and having seen other De La Iglesia movies, I do feel like they are gorier. Like I remember The Last Circus being a very gory movie, but yeah, this feels like he was kind of walking the tightrope between the things and was leaning more on the comedy side.
And probably also because I wouldn't be surprised if they released this film like at Christmas time, like in Spain during that time, because just because it's a holiday and it's an alternative to watch whatever is being in like the cinema during that time.
Because like we saw Rare Exports, which is another horror comedy at Christmas, and it also does restrain itself from becoming, because they're like, well, it does involve Christmas iconography, and we don't want to like go too far with that, I guess.
There's this whole thing that he needs to get blood from a virgin.
That was this is what, like Desperado, a very set PC movie. It is about everything is about getting the characters to this scene where then a whole bunch of things go wrong, like when they storm into Kavan's apartment and all the things that happen, and then talk about the blood scene where he's trying to get
and there's but before that there's like a thing that's setting it up. Like one of the examples is a heavy metal dude's mother who runs
Rosario
explains to like her employee that if anybody were to come in there with like ill intentions, she would blast them between the legs with her rifle. Like that she would not go down, and she like
foreshadowing
without a fight. And so the priest goes in. He's like, I'm going to take the blood of the virgin because she's supposed to come from a small town. And so therefore, because you come from a small town, it's a religious town. And there's a remark about the heavy metal dude has been trying for over a year to have sex with her, but she won't go in. And there's like this awkward conversation where the priest is like, hey, I'm a priest.
You can tell me. Have you had sex before?
And she's like,
what? And she's very kind of like weirded out by it.
It's just like then this whole thing, like he knocks her out. He does not want to kill her
because he has like a syringe.
He has a syringe, and I think it's also because it's like he feels bad because he's like, this is a good girl,
and he's still a priest.
And like, but it's also like this weird thing. We see him like harm and do other things to other people, but it's like, I wish that they were gonna play up the conflict of that. They played it up a little bit more on other times because it didn't make sense.
There's not consistency.
Yeah, because he's just sort of like, oh, it's gonna be the syringe, and that's when like Rosario comes in and she's like, well, fuck you. She comes in.
It's a great scene. It's probably one of the best scenes of the movie. Yeah,
like, she is going off, and he like doesn't know what to do. He ends up killing her.
When we talked about Edgar Wright, I think this is a movie Edgar Wright clearly saw.
Yeah.
And when he was making something like Shaun of the Dead, he had this in mind. Because, like, the Jose Maria character is a Nick Frost character if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, it's also like I could see the influence of Hot Fuzz because of like
that
being
yeah.
like a whole cult thing, and this setup. There, and I wish like some like that there was. I think I don't know if maybe because it's just sort of like this is my sense of humor, that there had been more like big emotions, because the priest ends up telling the heavy metal dude like, hey, I really hate to tell you this, but I kind of killed your mom. And he's like, huh? And all like
there isn't really a
no,
reaction.
there's no reaction. All he cares about is his granddad, who he's feeding acid to,
and walks around with just a bathrobe on, his dick hanging out the entire time.
Out. And it's also like this weird thing that is just like, it just shows me that the writers didn't know what they're talking about, because it's like, you can't take acid on a daily basis because it would make no effect.
Yeah, that is very true. That, like, the receptors get burnt out, and you have to take those breaks.
He's giving his grandfather acid on a regular basis to keep him like cool, and he's just like, oh, if it weren't for my like annoying mom, well, she's the one like providing like.
Well, it's like Jose is clearly an asshole. Like, he's just an idiot.
And like, so like there's never like a big reaction to the fact that his mom died. He's just like, oh, but my grandpa, my like, which is such a bro move, but I don't like, again, I don't really know the history of this.
Well, they have a very we're talking about the movie feels very messy, and especially the set pieces. It feels like the movie was written around those set pieces.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if there was a whole scene where this priest was trying to like draw blood out of this woman and the landlady finds out? And then, oh, wouldn't it be funny if the three guys have to escape the apartment and they climb out the window, and they like there's a building in Spain. I don't know if it still has this like neon Schweppes sign on it, but they're like, oh, and they crawl on that. They have to go down that sign, right? Wouldn't that be funny? Because it is a movie that makes great use of the architecture in Madrid.
Yeah,
like there's and it's buildings I've never seen before. But they felt very iconic when they were shown on screen. Like there's the one, I think it's called like the Gate to Europe or something. Yeah. And it's the two slanted towers that they go to at the end. Mm-hmm. And it's like a great shot of that building. I'm like, this feels like something made for the movie, but it's not. It was just something there. So it feels like they wanted to make those scenes, but they didn't have the connective tissue between the scenes.
Yeah.
And it's the connective tissue where the movie lost me quite a bit.
Yeah. Because
the characters are written so comically that I don't find them believable. Mm-hmm. And like there is a sense of like quirkiness to the world, but there's no depth to the world.
Yeah, I could understand that, because I feel like the only character that felt like he had a life upon his own is like the psychic dude.
Kavan, yeah.
Because it's like, oh, he has a girlfriend, he has a show, he's trying to run the show, he's like trying to get the priest back on his side. He's like, he's also sort of like, all of this is a gimmick in some way or another. He's like, it's just coincidences, or there are a few times that it's going to work, but I've never done this shit before, so I can't tell you if this is real or not.
Well, like all of his publications are just full of bullshit, so he doesn't assume any of this stuff is actual magic.
Also, like, they had a missed opportunity with like the metal stuff. It was like rushed over.
Yeah, they never really touch on like any of that.
Like he goes over to like the metal show, and it's so brief that it just sort of like, why did he make such a big entrance where this priest goes into this place? He's like, oh, I want to find like hidden messages like in these, but never goes upon this, or we don't see him like really indulging in like
probably
music.
De La Iglesia knew the band.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, we'll put them in a scene. That's the kind of movie we watched. Yeah. It's like, it's very much a, hey, they're cool, I'm going to put them in a scene in the movie. And like, that can be fun. I'm sure it's an incredibly fun movie to make, right?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a fun movie to watch the whole runtime. Mm-hmm. I think one of the weak points are the actors are not all that good.
No.
And so when you have that connective tissue, the sort of character moments, the actors aren't selling it well enough. I feel like the guy who played Kavan was pretty good.
Yeah.
But I feel like the guy who played Jose was not that great of an actor. He was okay.
Who was he that again? Like
Oh, the metal guy.
Yeah, no,
He was okay. Because I immediately thought of like Nick Frost and Shaun of the Dead. And so immediately I'm comparing it and I'm like, oh, Nick Frost is so much more charismatic, even though he's this slob. You're still like, no, I could see why somebody would want to hang out with that guy. Nothing about Jose. You're like, no, I would not want to hang out with him. He seems obnoxious.
Like, I think back to my days when I would go to like shows in Puerto Rico, and like I knew this one guy that was a little older that was like really into the music scene. And having met people like that, all they do is connect it back to music.
Very autistic.
Yeah,
it's the fixation, right?
Like that is where they're the most comfortable in. Like,
but he didn't really even talk about music that much.
Like, oh, I just like drugs and metal, and he's like, I'm a Satanist. But you think like you could have used this guy as a tool of being like, oh no, I know like this song from this. And,
well,
like,
he never. They introduce those as character traits, and they never expand on them for the rest of the movie.
That's a huge problem.
And it's a waste of like that character. If you're gonna have a metalhead character in your movie about the birth of the Antichrist, play that up somehow. Like,
yeah.
I thought the actress who played Rosario was good. Mm-hmm. And she's one of the better ones, and it's probably because she's older. She's a veteran actress.
Yeah.
She knows how to take a small role and turn it into something interesting through like her choices on how she responds to stuff. But yeah, like the movie jumps around a lot.
Yeah.
And it can be a little dizzying as a result of that, because you're not really sure like where the priest is in his journey at certain points, because he's gone to so many places and done so many things, and the timeline isn't clear in our heads.
Yeah, I almost wish that there'd been a little bit more breathing room, and it almost wished like it's one where you have to either make the ending a twist that makes it like valid to have gone through what we went through to like be following this priest around, or you needed him to actually have like enemies that he's fighting against, which kind of like reminds
me. There's no antagonist till the end of the movie.
Like, you know, like you remember like the show Lucy the Devil,
Lucy, Daughter of the Devil.
Yeah, and like they had that priest, two priests and a nun that was like always trying to follow them but couldn't find. Like they needed something like that to be ridiculous.
Because doesn't he's in like a convent or something at the beginning.
Yeah, and he tells one other person, but that person immediately dies.
But then it's like he can just disappear from this convent and nobody notices he's gone.
Or like that nobody else like knew that he was developing these conclusions.
But yeah, like, you have a scene where, you know, I don't know what the version of a mother superior is when it comes to priests.
I don't know, father superior.
No, the priest boss, the priest manager, goes into like Angel's.
Like Catholic light. I have no idea. I can't tell you
because I know there's like
you weren't raised.
I know there's like cardinals and bishops and all this shit, but like I have no interest in learning that hierarchy unless I'm gonna like write something set in that world, and that ain't gonna happen. So like a scene where his superior comes into his room because he's disappeared, right? Yeah. And he finds all these notes and he understands what they're hinting at, and it's like he's gone to Madrid, then we must stop him.
Yeah,
and then you have this sort of. Now the race against time has some higher stakes, because like the Limpia Madrid people just kind of show up in the last 30 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and they don't really have any talk.
And we don't really know, like, I know they're fascists, but there's no explicit motivation or anything.
There's no talking. There's just like weird images of one being maybe a demon before like he's like killed.
Well, that's the acid.
But it's just also like it's missing those components to make it feel like you're rushing against time, and it's missing things that could have made it a little bit more interesting. It's still like when we finished watching it, it was one of those films that I really couldn't fully discard. I couldn't be like, oh, it's complete shit.
It has really good elements.
Yeah, it has really good elements, and it's also because it's like so many films that we watch, like I always wonder, like, oh, we need to watch more European or Latin American or like Asian films. It's sort of like you want to understand even the background of what's going on, but you're just sort of like,
even watching the films, you won't be able to get it.
Like you wonder if it's you, or until you start looking and then you're like, no, there's something missing in the film.
And this felt like like De La Iglesias, I always think is a very bold director.
Yeah.
Like he makes very strong choices in his movies. And this, I think, was one of his early, or like this is sort of like Desperado. This was like one of those movies that brought him to the attention of an audience outside of where you would expect.
Yeah.
And so I can see why in 1995 this would have become like a cult classic kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it really just doesn't feel as strong as I expected it would be going into it, having watched two of his other movies.
Yeah.
I had this sort of, the bar for me was set pretty high. And then I was a little disappointed by just the sort of sloppiness of the script.
It's this hard thing to actually like. Not every director is going to like make a home run on their first film. I feel as if that is a rarity. When it comes there is like a handful nowadays.
Ari Aster. Yeah.
What was the other?
I would say the Safdie brothers. No, the Safdie brothers, because their earlier films like Daddy Long Legs nobody saw.
What was that? The one that did like There Will Be Blood.
Paul Thomas Anderson.
I feel like
Hard Eight was his first movie,
and
that was a big that made a big impression.
Like it made an impression. Like you could like even when we watched the film, I was just like, it's not perfect, but you could tell like there's something there.
It's a director who has a clear point of view. And they have a clear style that they're shooting for. They may not hit the mark right away.
Yeah, and the guy that did Dune, I can't like
Denis Villeneuve, which
like,
we
also
I haven't seen his first movies,
but even in the first film, so
like Incendie.
Yeah, it's sort of like you could. These are people that is just sort of like, or like Fincher. Like there's something like about the beginnings of their stuff that you could tell. Like
Alien 3,
not my favorite film.
The Game,
but you could feel like they're gonna tighten it up.
Well, I would say like even with Alien 3 and The Game, even though they're like some of my least favorite Fincher movies, you can see Fincher's style. Like you see where the guy's going. So by the time you get to something like The Social Network or Zodiac, you're like, oh, this is him realizing that tone and that style. But yeah, it's with De La Iglesias, I can see where he was going, but his later movies are so much better than this.
I think it's him testing to see how much the audience can take.
Because yeah, I mean, like something like The Last Circus, it's a movie that is not going to appeal to a wide audience in the least. Like it is a very niche group of people that are going to like that stuff. Well, that was the Pop Cult Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for any relevant links to reviews or other sites. That we also include a link to popcult.blog, which is where you can find a whole bunch more reviews of all kinds of different media, from movies to TV to comic books and more. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast wherever it is that you listen, so you'll be notified when new episodes are up. And if you visit popcult.blog, starting tomorrow, May 1st, we'll begin a month-long series we're calling the American Theater on Film Volume 1, which involves watching a whole host of movies that are based on some of the most famous and prominent stage plays in American history. So things like A Streetcar Named Desire, 12 Angry Men, Death of a Salesman, and more. If you appreciate what we do here on the podcast and over on popcult.blog, we would encourage you to think about supporting us on Patreon. We've got lots of rewards and different goals that we're working towards over there. With that in mind, I want to thank our patrons. We have Morphine at our sneak preview level, as well as Becca and Matt, who donate at the Writers Room level. If you donate at that Writers Room level, that's $10 or more a month, you'll get to pick one movie a month for me to watch and review, and you can even add your own thoughts to my review if you'd like before I post it. With all that said, we hope that you keep listening.